Welcome to your in-depth weekly astrology overview for week commencing the 1st of April. I'm going to give you a collective perspective, but please stay with me. I will explore in great detail each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, your sun, or the moon. If you are new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please share them. I interact with each comment. If you're a returning visitor, thank you for joining me once more. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. This means every time I drop a video, you will get an alert. And I'd just like to mention my free daily written horoscope, which you can subscribe to by clicking on the link beneath this video. That will be fired to your device each morning. And I also give an overview for each day, which focuses on the key planetary influence, and then go through each of the 12 signs which you can enjoy. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week. We've got a cluster of energy in the sign of Aries, but also one in Pisces. In terms of that overall perspective, that energy in the sign of Aries is about initiation, taking action, injecting ongoing schemes with greater enthusiasm and drive and passion. But the energies in the sign of Pisces can slow things down somewhat. Now you can see right at the top of the chart there is the position of the moon. That's in the free-spirited sign of Sagittarius. It forges a great link with Mercury, but a much more challenging one to Neptune, even to the position of Venus and the part of fortune. This could be a week, therefore, with the moon being in Sagittarius, where it would be easy to be so intent in finding what we see as our truth that we let some issues that perhaps come up that are a little bit difficult to deal with. We could see some issues take on a life force of their own. So keeping a sense of perspective will be very important. However, on the first day of this week, Mercury goes into its retrograde in the sign of Aries, which is going to go on for 23 days. And Mercury's actually been forging a really lovely link to Neptune, asking us to pursue the things that interest us, but stay very much in touch with our senses. And you know, I feel that that is in some ways the lesson of this week. But Mercury retrograde in the passionate sign of Aries could make us a little bit impatient if things don't quite go as we had hoped. But also, the connection between Venus and Neptune, which is very close at the start of this week, becomes exact by Wednesday. So we do have an opportunity to really embrace our creativity, our flair, our imagination, our appreciation of healing or alternative medicine, or perhaps if you're a film buff or you love music or photography, those two are areas that really can sparkle. Now, if you're meeting someone for the first time, it could be that the connection can be quite mystical. But equally, if you're not seeing someone romantically, don't be surprised if you feel quite nostalgic for someone from your past, and could even try to check them out in some way. But also, it's important to understand that Venus combining with Neptune can create some distortion, particularly around a relationship matter. So if there is someone who seemed a little bit elusive, not quite as available as they could be, rather distracted, or so mysterious you just don't know where you stand, by the weekend, as the ruler of the sign of Aries, Mars, connects to Saturn, it may come to a biting point, and there could be a determination to find out exactly what is going on. And part of that can also come from the fact that Friday is a fabulously powerful day. It's when Venus moves into Aries, technically detrimented. I personally love Venus in Aries because Venus can be about desire, but the sign of Aries, ruled by Mars, obviously has that dynamic to it. So I feel that people with Venus in their natal charts tend to be go-getters, whether it's around money, whether it is around their creative interests or someone they like. But Venus forges a link to Pluto, the planet of transformation, in Aquarius for the first time in over 200 years. Our thinking in terms of how we connect to others, Pluto, needs to work in terms of how we can protect ourselves as individuals, in terms of honouring our needs. And because the Sun combines with the North Node in Aries, also on Friday, and for the first time since 2006, if we feel that there is someone around us, and it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, it could be a friendship, it could be a colleague, it could be someone we have a shared interest with, but if we feel that someone's not being quite upfront or open about their intentions, or is distracted, or potentially, sadly, even a little bit disloyal, that's why the end of this week can be a time when we feel a real furnace of determination to be much more in charge of our future destiny. If we feel we have been given away our power too much, being perhaps too understanding of a situation which is not rendered much appreciation or respect back, that big set of energies, and including the Sun tightening up in its conjunction with Chiron, which becomes exact on the eclipse at the start of next week, that all points towards a big need for us to not neglect what makes us really important in terms of fulfilling our individual needs. And as much as it's good to connect with people, and there can be some beautiful connections, there also could be some disappointing ones or some real big endings. Now, please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, from Aries through to Pisces in much greater detail. If you would, however, like to ascend above the following zodiac broadcast, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place, I can produce for you your life roadmap report. This helps you to understand the patterns that are played out in your life so far and gain a much more intimate understanding of what they've meant, but most of all, how you can work with them better going forwards. In my special package of 30% off, you can also get your 12 months transits. That's the moving planets in the sky interacting with your totally unique blueprint. Now, if you already know your natal chart and you're quite aware of your transits, why not check out my draconic package? This is our soul chart, our karmic chart. It moves the North Node to 0 degrees Aries, the vernal point for everybody. And therefore it can, for some people, move the chart around considerably. So for example, my sun in natal is in Aquarius, in draconics in Gemini. My moon in natal is Aquarius. In draconic, it's in the sign of Cancer. And these changes can help us to understand the energies we brought into this world. The natal chart, that's the roots of our being. The natal chart is the outcome. Please see below for more, but it's the same format. You get your life roadmap in draconic, but also your draconic 12-month forecast. Welcome Aries to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April 2024 for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. The week begins in some ways with the potential for some bright energy, with the moon angling so positively to Mercury. But of course, Mercury's been in its pre-retrograde shadow over the last week, and although it was forging a magical alliance to Neptune, giving you a chance to blend your thinking with your intuition, ironically, Neptune forges a really tough right angle to the moon at the start of this week. If there is any undercurrents in your situation, or people you're not quite sure of, or there are trust issues, or someone doesn't feel quite as connected to you as they have been in the past, there could be a tendency for you to be quite anxious about that, because what the moon in the sign of Sagittarius can do in a square with Neptune in Pisces is amplify the sensitivities, amplify the subconscious. So you could have some very powerful and potent dreams this week. But that 12th house energy also includes your ruler Mars, which moved into the sign of Pisces last week and is going to be an important player later this week. But the other thing to share with you with the event chart on the screen is the position of Venus and the part of fortune. They are influenced by the moon as well, but that's a very strong connection. If there is someone that you've been getting to know and you're feeling a very good vibe about it, it doesn't have to be in a romantic context, and perhaps it's someone that you've got more of a sensory feeling is good for you. By the middle of the week, as Venus moves forwards and connects with Neptune, if you did meet up, it could be something that really gave you both a massive sense of connection. But for sure, if you are somebody who's been working behind the scenes for a very long time, perhaps in a big organisation, perhaps in a hospital, perhaps you are a psychic, a therapeutic healer, this can be a very important week, but it's also going to be a very important week for your boundaries. Because by Friday, Venus moves forward into the exciting sign of Aries, where it's going to be through to the 29th. This can help you to give yourself a flamboyant makeover. Even if you're someone who is a dedicated follower of fashion, a few modifications can actually give you a reboot, one that really can boost your confidence in a significant way. But Venus also links to Pluto in the part of your situation to do with your friendships and future. Are you in a relationship or a friendship where you can see you being connected for the long term? If you are, you're likely to be able to celebrate this hugely, and there may be someone who's becoming more and more important. But you know, the converse can be true, not because necessarily somebody's done anything wrong. It may be that you just don't feel that karmic connection, which can be very important with Pluto. Or if you feel that you want to go in a different direction around a creative interest and a friend doesn't quite get it. Also on the 5th, the Sun applies to the retreating North Node. For the first time since 2006 in your sign, but this is a wonderful chance for you to get a firmer grip on what's important to you. The North Node can be called the point of destiny. It's certainly something that influences us all, but it's at this juncture for you, really asking you to think back over that last period of years, right through to 2006, and think about what you've achieved. It's possible that in a creative sense, you have done incredibly well. But if you feel you have been giving your power away somewhat, as the Sun also applies to Chiron at the end of this week, before becoming exact on the total solar eclipse in your sign at the start of next week, all of this energy is asking you to think about, are you being distracted by supporting other people rather too much, being caught up in relationships where people are not quite as invested in you as you'd like them to be? Are you being too much of a carer in certain situations? Are you fracturing your vitality in some ways by being distracted away from what's really important? Have you been spending quite a lot of time feeling rather withdrawn, or perhaps feeling rather tender and emotional? It wouldn't be a surprise. And remember, I mentioned Mars at the start of this forecast. Mars applies to Saturn at the end of this week, and with Mercury going retrograde from Monday, it may be that the combination of those two influences is going to see you decide to take a much stronger line with something that hasn't been honouring you. Now, it may be down to you, it may be totally down to your own decision making, but if it is something where someone else has not been supporting you as much as they could be, you could find yourself being very determined to take a much firmer line as this week comes to a close, and that could mean certain people are rooted out of your situation, or you apply for a new job, or you start your own business, because the next 6 months is going to be one of the most exciting periods you have ever experienced. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Aries. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great week. And if you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share, or subscribe. Welcome, Taurus, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart. First of all, we need to be mindful of your ruler. Venus is in House 11. House 11 is very much to do with our connections to others, can be friendships, higher ideals, future plans, and it can be lucky. And you can see it's next to the part of fortune. So that points towards the potential for some serendipity this week, which would be really delightful. But if you recall, Mars, the planet of passion, moved into your 11th house last week. And that could ask you to take more of a lead around group activities as an organizer. But you're certainly going to want to feel that you're very much part of any alliance that you're in. But the collective of energy in the sign of Aries is much more reflective, much more sensitive, and much more psychological. And that really comes up to an important boil on Friday. However, we also need to be mindful of the two planets in your sign, Jupiter and Uranus, inching closer together. It's going to become exact on the 21st of April. But the key for later this month is when the Sun makes its way into your sign on the 20th, because then it's going to square up to Pluto. Also on the 29th, your ruler Venus squares up to Pluto. So April is going to be a very potent month for you. And what's cooking now is almost like setting in motion, even if it's not entirely obvious, the likely developing energies that point towards the outcome. And you could find by the middle of this week, as Venus forges a quite exquisite link to Neptune, that you could celebrate something with someone that you're very fond of. So if you meet up with a friend or a group of people, you do something that you all collectively enjoy, it could be a really beautiful night. However, equally, Venus and Neptune coming together could see you become very disappointed that somebody isn't quite matching your hopes and expectations. And because Mars moves forwards and applies to Saturn as the week draws to a close, any alliance which isn't working as you would like, where perhaps there is some politics, let's go back to that wheel, the Moon in House 8 squaring with Neptune in 11. If there is anyone you're involved with who tends to be possessive or controlling, that is going to be something you're going to find much more difficult to tolerate as this month goes on. So by the time your ruler moves on Friday into your 12th house, that can start to trigger a much deeper process of reflection. And you're going to be really thinking about, are you on the right track around all sorts of relationships? If you're single, you could feel very, very nostalgic for past family members, past friendships, perhaps even an old flame. But Venus forges a very powerful link to Pluto. The first with Pluto in Aquarius, it's for over 200 years. But that 12th, 10th house energy is really intriguing. Maybe in terms of earning a living, you could find yourself thinking about a role which is not so front of house, if you like. It may not be interacting with the public directly, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't be quite powerful. Funnily enough, Pluto in the 10th house, people who have that natally can end up in the limelight, but don't necessarily choose it. So something big around your work could see you yearning for a role that is more psychologically gratifying for you. But on the same day, the advancing Sun meets the retreating North Node, and the Sun is also inching by the end of this week towards an exact conjunction with the wounded healer Chiron at the start of next week. So all of that 12th house energy is giving you an enormous amount to think about. So as much as we start this week with that brilliant alliance between Venus and the part of fortune, that square between the moon and Neptune can cause some uncertainties, and Mercury going into retrograde on the first day of this week suggests that you could find yourself being a little bit more anxious, or conversely more analytical about certain parts of your situation you're uncertain about. When all the 12th house energy reaches that climax on Friday, and by the weekend Mars connects to Saturn, if something hasn't been working in a big way, whether it's a job, whether it's a friendship, whether it's an interest, you may feel you just have no choice but to withdraw a little bit and really dive deep. And you could dive extraordinarily deep over the next 6 months to try to work out what it is that you really want to be doing. Because when you get to that position later in this month, when the sun moves into your sign, that's going to give you some assets and tools to make some key moves. But it's also going to make you much less tolerant of any politics, especially if you feel someone's trying to hold power over you. That's going to be repeated with Venus squaring up with Pluto as well. So if there is any politics in any relationship, that's really the key theme for this week. And yet the relationships or friendships or connections that are really good and positive, and you can absolutely trust and rely upon, they may be the ones that you're really celebrating. But unfortunately, I feel that there will be quite a stark gap between the two areas. So I feel some people will come through for you strongly. Other situations or people you may start to realize are not working for you, or someone could show you that they're not as trustworthy and sincere, the classic fair weather friend scenario, as you may have previously hoped. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Taurus. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to like, comment, or share any of my videos, I'd be honoured if you did so now. And of course, please subscribe. Have a great week and do take care. Welcome, Gemini, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the ascendant, the sun, or the moon. On the screen now, I'm showing your event chart for the start of the week. We need to be mindful of your ruler Mercury. It is going to go into retrograde later on Monday, but it forges a really bright alliance with the moon in your sector of relating. You may hear from a friend this week that you haven't heard from for a while, but Neptune, right at the top of your chart in the part of your situation to do with your work and worldly interactions, that's actually in a much more challenging right angle to Neptune. So perhaps Mercury going into retrograde is going to make it more difficult to keep the lines of communication really clear. The link with the moon can be positive, but in terms of your professional situation, things could seem a little bit murky, I would say. Perhaps even by the end of this week, it could be a little bit of a battle of wills, but I'll explain more about that shortly. But the other energy in the sign of Aries is asking you to seriously think about your long-term future, your wider alliances, your social situation, the groups that you're invested in, the things that really give you a sense of identity that's beyond the material. And yet that cluster of energy in the sign of Pisces includes Venus and the part of fortune, suggesting that maybe something can develop in terms of a job offer, an application, or develop in your own business that could please you. So quite a lot of contrasting energies at the start of this week. But by Wednesday, Venus moves forwards and is in an exact conjunction with Neptune. If you are a creative, if you are someone who uses flair and artistry in your work, or conversely, you're a very compassionate and caring person, or you use your senses in order to guide other people, the combination between Venus and Neptune can be very sweet indeed. And you could find that you're going to be able to showcase your talents in a very a very special way. But by Friday, that is definitely the most powerful day of the week, because Venus joins up with the collective in Aries of Mercury, Chiron, the North Node and the Sun. But Venus is technically not at its best in the sign of Aries. But if there is a hope you have, or there is someone that you're drawn to, perhaps even romantically, in your friendship group, it's going to give you a bit more daring through to the 29th of the month. But also immediately there is a connection to Pluto. Pluto in the part of your situation to do with widening your horizons, higher education, big knowledge that's helping you to decode the meaning of life. Maybe there's a connection between that desire and the type of person or people that you're going to be drawn towards. But also the advancing sun meets the retreating North Node for the first time since 2006, also on Friday. And that's what I meant when I said earlier in the video that you're going to be thinking about your long-term future, I feel, and your connections, your network. And maybe Mercury retrograde is all part of revisiting your thinking around those areas, because we can become rather conditioned to a particular outlook, and it's good actually to flow and be flexible. You teach us as a sign the need for that more than any other sign, I'd say. But your dexterity can obviously see at times you may be lacking a little bit of focus, because there are so many different people and situations you can just dip in and out of. And I feel that what you're being asked to do with this collective at the end of this week is really contemplate very, very seriously how you could elevate your soul almost into a dimension of being or connections with others that really, really lifts you. And because Mars comes into contact with Saturn over the weekend, this is the aspect that I hinted about earlier in the week. If in your professional situation you're working in an organisation which is very hierarchical, very unbended, where someone is very authoritative, it will be done as they say. It's not very collegiate. That could be such a turn off for you, and that can feed into this wider perspective that you could be developing. So you could have a massive breakthrough with Venus's combination to Neptune in terms of showcasing your gifts and talents. But I feel the long term, the people you're really connecting to that are important, the principles that drive you essentially, really come sharply into focus, because the sun applies to Chiron towards the end of this week and also becomes exact at the start of the following week. And if there is something where you're coming into contact with authority and people see a situation differently to you, or they feel you've tried to live outside a structure which isn't acceptable to them anymore, you could be held to account for some of your past actions, because the sign of Pisces is very much about the cumulative outcome of all our actions. Because Saturn does that, it can be very much about fate in a way. So whatever we've created, we will eventually reap. And Mars applying to that could create a lot of tension as this week draws to a close. And that's why you may have to realign your long-term thinking in some kind of way, whether it's this week or over the next 6 months, in a way that you're really starting to see more and more by the end of this week, I feel. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Gemini. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. And if you could, I'd be honoured if you would like, comment, share or subscribe. Welcome Cancer to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart for the start of the week, and you can see that your ruler, the moon, is in the sign of Sagittarius. Now, the sign of Sagittarius is a bit of a free spirit, but for you, this is house 6. This is where you can get seriously practical. In fact, there's a great link between the moon and Mercury in the part of your situation that's to do with career and how you connect to the wider world. There could be a link if you're going to have a conversation this week, or start to rethink your interactions or the way you earn a living, because Mercury goes retrograde later on Monday. However, you can also see that Neptune, the planet of dreams, is in house 9. Now, Neptune here has been brilliant for you since 2012 in terms of encouraging you to expand your horizons. And it's possible that your life has changed enormously since then. Neptune has probably helped you to develop your consciousness and your worldview in quite a different way from before 2012. But at the start of this week, it's actually in a tough right angle with the moon for you. So the moon's pushing you to be more virtuous, apply to those practical strands, something actually that you don't usually have much problem with. But Neptune's asking you to have a bit of escapism. So it could just mean that at points this week, doing the things that really inspire you is much more alluring than the daily domestic routines. Totally understandable, of course. But you can see that you do have a big cluster of energy in house 10, including the Sun, North Node, Chiron, and critically Mercury, which goes into that retrograde. Now, Mercury retrogrades have a very big reputation. And if you are in a job at the moment which, you're not particularly enjoying, you can take charge of things through the retrograde over the next 23 days and be proactive in perhaps retraining or learning some new skills or applying for jobs, adapting your curriculum vitae, reaching out to new potential employers, or if you work for yourself, developing some new and fresh services that may tempt in some new customers. So Mercury retrograde, of course, can create some glitches. It may be that you're waiting to hear back from a potential employer and that information doesn't come as quickly as you would like. But I can tell you for sure, the next 6 months for you is going to be a giant time for your place in life. There's going to be some radical changes for you for sure. But in house 9, which is very much about being independent, more adventurous, Mars joined last week. Mars is a very rugged influence, and it is by the end of this week going to come into an alliance with Saturn. If you are discussing anything around a contract, particularly with Mercury retrograde, you could find yourself becoming frustrated if you feel someone's not being very fair. And that may feed in also to that right angle between your ruler, the moon, and Neptune, because something you're told at some point this week may turn out to be fabulously not true. It may be a complete mistake, but it's also possible that someone is being a bit artful and maybe in some ways trying to create an impression in order to gain something. So best to be quite shrewd about your interactions. Fortunately, Venus, the planet of money and love, is in a great link with the part of fortune at the start of this week, even if it is compromised a bit by the moon. And by Wednesday, Venus moves forwards and connects to Neptune. If you have been thinking about planning a vacation or actually going on holiday, if you did hit around the heart of this week, it could turn out to be a stunning success, because despite Mercury's retrograde and its reputation to dissuade us from moving around when it is retracing its steps, for you, this combination can really help you to trip the light fantastic. So if you're going somewhere that's really different, the cultural side of things, the artistic side of things, even the smells will all feed into your senses in a very vibrant way. If you're not traveling, ninth house energy can be about learning things. Neptune, spirituality, and Venus about how we relate could be a connection around all those areas. So you could go to a lecture, an art gallery, watch something on YouTube, which you really find is very, very powerful in a positive way. But by Friday, Venus moves to the top of your chart. An incredibly powerful location because Venus in Aries, which is a fire sign and ruled by Mars, Venus is technically debilitated here, but Venus is about desire. The 10th house is about ambition, and Venus's ability to use charm and diplomacy in order to get what we want is emphasized even more by the connection to Pluto in the sign of Aquarius with Venus in Aries for the first time in over 200 years. And because Venus is in a very deep lying position, the 8th house, your psychological understanding and ability to read situations, but at the same time work with people skillfully, could render a great reward. It could happen almost straight away. Also, the Sun meets the retreating North Node, point of destiny, and if you have wanted to raise your profile, receive more recognition, move jobs, start that business that you've long hoped for, with the Sun approaching Chiron by the end of this week as well, which becomes exact on the eclipse on the following Monday, this is a giant time. If you have been involved in an extremely responsible position for a very, very long time, you may surprise people by relinquishing it, if not this week, but over this next half year. Also, because Mars gets into a tussle with Saturn at the end of this week, there could be an argument, and that argument could be based over a difference of a point of view or difference in philosophies. Or maybe if you are moving around, you encounter someone, the type of people that seem to get off on applying petty rules, which really could be very triggering. But try to keep mindful of the big picture. You're a cardinal sign. That means you're a sign of leadership. There's only 4 cardinal signs: Aries, you, Libra, and Capricorn. And you're rather like Libra in a way that sometimes you need to be stirred up a little bit, because you don't generally like confrontation, just like Libra doesn't. But because you are a leader sign, once something isn't working for you, you can apply an enormous amount of willpower, strength of character, determination, drive, passion, authority in order to change things in a way which works for you. So maybe all this Piscean energy in some ways is pushing you to liberate yourself from something that isn't really working, which takes us back to that square between your ruler, the moon, which is in your sector of responsibilities, and Neptune in your 9th house of freedom, very close to Venus and the part of fortune. Mars applies to Saturn in the same area at the end of the week. So if you've done a very good job for a very long time in an organization, but you no longer feel appreciated or valued, or it's no longer giving you a sense of satisfaction, that's why the next 6 months is going to see some major shifts for you. But I want you to know that despite Mercury's retrograde, it's going to give you a chance to rethink things, recalibrate things, and realign towards something which is right for you, and where you can use your executive qualities, your management skills, your life skills in such a successful way. But I think it may be in a new environment, and it can be a very exciting period of change, but it does mean change, which of course can be a little bit daunting. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Cancer. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. And if you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share or subscribe. Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. You're entering a really exciting time, Leo. On the screen now, you can see there's a cluster of energy in your sister fire sign of Aries, including your ruler, the Sun. Now, Mercury, the planet of communication, does go into a retrograde later on Monday. So if you are traveling anywhere over the next few weeks, particularly long distance travel, or you're interacting using technology, thinking of buying a new vehicle, 9th house energy is all to do with these. perhaps even a course of higher education. So inevitably we can think there can be glitches. But if you look at the position of the moon, it's actually in the 5th house of your solar chart and forging a great link to Mercury. So I think your passions, the 5th house, particularly with the moon in the free-spirited Sagittarius, point towards having the confidence to do some different things, even if it does mean rethinking your approach a little bit and being prepared for some glitches to come up along the way. However, Neptune, the planet of dreams, is in a much more challenging right angle to the position of the moon. If there are people or there is a situation which you're finding a little bit limiting just when you're wanting to be more daring, independent and taking on life with a greater gusto, that could be something that actually you find really frustrating, particularly if someone doesn't actually voice that objection. And Neptune can be very much to do with atmospheres as much as articulating things. So that's just something to be mindful of. In fact, Venus and the part of fortune forge a very strong alliance in house 8, which could see you have some kind of financial uplift this week, which really, really pleases you. And of course, Mars moved into your 8th house last week, which is going to give you more desire, particularly if you are wanting to go into business for yourself, or there is someone you're drawn to more romantically. And that can be a factor because Pluto, the planet of change, is right on your 7th house cusp. But that's not just about relationships, it's also about your confidence in terms of how you connect, but also compete with others or even set your boundaries. And then in house 10, how you interact with people in a more business environment, there's the combination between Jupiter and Uranus, asking you to look at things afresh. Jupiter can be about knowledge, Uranus can be about innovation. Is there a link? So there's part of you that I feel wants to try something new at the start of this week. Mercury can see you getting sources of information, but also perhaps experiencing a few proverbial roadblocks. There may be a situation where you've been deeply invested, that someone is not so happy about what you're trying to do, or it could be that someone is actually very supportive. And that will start to become clear by the middle of this week when Venus and Neptune forge a quite beautiful alliance. The 8th house is not just about sex and intimacy. It is about the spiritual connection. It's where we're most devoted or invested. If you have that connection with someone who also enables you to still leave you feeling like you're a free spirit, that's absolutely awesome. And that could be what you really do experience. If you're someone who's extremely creative, a new business opportunity could come through your artistry in some way. But by Friday, we have one of the biggest moments of the whole year, to be honest, because the advancing sun meets the retreating north node, the point of destiny, which for you in the 9th house is pushing you like that collective in Aries to be more experimental. But within that, Venus moves into the sign of Aries. Technically debilitated, but it forges a fantastic link to Pluto in Aquarius for the first time for over 200 years. So if there is a correlation between something you're trying different, where you're taking the initiative, and how you're interacting with people or connecting with people, and you're doing so with more conviction and more confidence, by being more adventurous and independent minded, you can actually start to reap some rewards. And there's a big picture here, a giant picture in fact, because the sun is advancing towards Chiron, the wounded healer, which suggests if you've ever had a belief that you're not academic enough, or you don't have the skills or knowledge enough, or you don't have the confidence to travel or to mix or work with people from a different cultural background, that can be swept aside from the time of the solar eclipse on Monday over the next 6 months. So a lot of this is down to your self-belief, because being ruled by the sun makes you the primary member of the zodiac from a more masculine viewpoint. The rulership of the moon of Cancer makes Cancer the primary ruler of our hearts, if you like. So yours is a very masculine influence, but sometimes, Leo, people, I feel, because of your fixed nature, need to have someone working with you in order for you to really get the momentum going. But once you get into something, you can be extremely applied, and that fix becomes a great asset. So this is a time when you're being asked to be reactive against your own tendency to stick with what you know. Have the confidence to try different things. If through Mercury retrograde not all those things work out, don't beat yourself up. This is a time to be enterprising, to widen your world like never before, because after all the sacrifice you've put in with Pluto going through Capricorn since 2008, this is an enormous opportunity to reimagine your whole life purpose in such a powerful way. I hope you have a great week, Leo. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share or subscribe. Welcome, Virgo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart at the start of the week. You can see your ruler Mercury is in the 8th house. Brilliant if you're wanting to check out and investigate your joint finances or investments. But of course, Mercury is set to go retrograde later in the day. But Neptune, the planet of dreams, which has had such a potent influence upon you in terms of relationships since 2012, is in a very tricky right angle with the moon, which is in the tender 4th house. In the sign of Sagittarius, the moon is looking for truth, but the 4th house can be where we need to be protective or a little bit more sheltered. The right angle between Neptune and the moon can create a little bit of confusion, but it may not be your confusion. It may be that someone you're interacting with in the family seems out of sorts or keeps changing their mind or is a little bit hard to reach. And that's why with Mercury going retrograde, it's important to understand that this is going to be a psychological time for you, and probably most of all around your relationships. Because as Mercury starts to retrace its steps, the 8th house is where we're most invested, most devoted. And it can be where we're going to encounter some big transformations. And if we think about it, Mercury is the ruler of merchants, so it can be about business. The 8th house can be about our long-term earning. So if you're not particularly happy in a job, maybe through to the 25th of this month, you are going to be investigating other opportunities. But there's part of you that can work very, very well with others. And that's emphasized at the start of this week by a brilliant link between Venus, the planet of relating, and the part of fortune. So a relationship can be lucky for you this week. But Mars moved into this area last week and has probably given you an ability, if you want to use it, to be a bit more robust around your boundaries. Now, Mars is going to connect to Saturn later this week at the weekend, but in the middle of this week, Venus applies to Neptune. So there could be two outcomes with this, Virgo, to be honest. You could be extremely fortunate and have a connection this week, which is breathtaking. But on the other hand, conversely, you could get to a point in an existing relationship, and it doesn't have to be a romantic one, where you really feel that you've had enough, that you've done your very best to reach into another person's situation, be sensitive to them, supportive and caring, and still you're getting what can feel like a lack of appreciation or respect, or the cold shoulder. If that is the case, the cluster of energy that develops on Friday with Venus in your 8th house, moving into Aries, technically debilitated, forging a link to Pluto in your sector of service, the 6th house, that can give you a lot of insights into where you feel valued or not. but the sun applies to the North Node for the first time since 2006 in Aries, and that 8th house energy is also ramped up furthermore by the sun inching towards Chiron. The 8th house is where we want to feel a sense of deep meaning. And if we don't get a sense of deep meaning, it can be a very lonely place to be, I feel, because it's a very psychological area. So with the cluster of energy in the 7th house, looking at the start of the week, perhaps confusing, but also the potential for some magic. Then Mars applies to Saturn over the last couple of days. You're really going to make some big decisions this week, I feel. If there is someone peripheral in your world who hasn't really given you what you feel you deserve, you may decide that you want to move on, because the 8th house can be about change and it can be about endings. Now, it may be that you won't make the decision instantly because the influence of the solar eclipse, which occurs on Monday, will provide a backdrop over the next 6 months. But big changes about how you earn money, how you marshal your resources, how you connect to others, where you feel validated, where you can enjoy intimacy, yes, even sex. And if those areas are evolving in a dynamic and positive way for you, all well and good. But if they're not, this could be a time when you may seriously need to think again. So Mercury's retrograde, obviously something you have a great affinity to because you're very connected to its energies, asks you to discriminate one of your key talents and reanalyze something that may not be particularly obvious that you have to think into. It's time to don the proverbial detective's mag to divine what's really working for you, whether it's in a practical sense financially, whether it's in a spiritual, intimate sense in a close romantic tie, or whether it's just your alliances with people in general. Are you getting what you need back? That's the big question for you this week, Virgo. And there's a lot of compulsion there for you to take the action to make you feel that things are evolving in a way that's meaningful to you. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. If you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share, or subscribe. Welcome Libra to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of the week, and you can see big cluster of energy still in house 7, including the Sun. So that gives you a little bit of a pointer of where this week's activity will lie. Yes, it's going to be your interaction with others, often a critical area for you. Mercury starts this week just direct, but does go retrograde later on Monday. But it is forging a brilliant link to the Moon right at the outset of the week, and the Moon's in your 3rd house. So there could be a bright conversation early on Monday with a neighbour or a sibling. But you can also see that Neptune, which has been in your sector of sacrifice, physical health, work since 2012, is in a much more challenging right angle to the Moon. That suggests the obligations and practical things that you need to deal with this week could be a little bit draining. Perhaps because you're not getting clear messages from others. But your ruler Venus forges a really good link with the part of fortune. So if you were applying for a job, as long as the atmosphere felt right in the discussion and the environment of where you'd be working also feels like you'd be comfortable in it, there could be a slice of fortune attached to that part of your situation, because Mars has moved into your 6th house. It's bolstering you, giving you more robust energy. There's a bit more stamina too, especially since Saturn has been affecting that for the last year or so. Now later this week, Mars is going to apply itself to Saturn, so it is important, particularly with Mercury going retrograde on Monday, just to prepare for some of the aggravations and snags that could come up. Actually, your ruler Venus forges a superb link with Neptune on Wednesday. If you are a creative, you could find that you can get a good blend of your imagination, but also how you're going to make this work in a tangible way. That can be part of this week's story. But I feel also, if you're someone who feels that you've been inclined to be rather taken for granted, perhaps at work, even domestically, perhaps you're being a little bit too self-critical on yourself at times, that comes more sharply into focus as Mars applies to Saturn at the end of the week. And if you are even a very busy person, but if you are a very conscientious person, I don't feel the end of this week is the right time to be pushing yourself ever harder to try to pack more into your day. It's actually a time to think more about your needs, but particularly around relationships, because Friday is an incredibly important day, because your ruler Venus moves into your opposite sign, technically detrimented in Aries, but forges a stunning alliance with Pluto in your 5th house. If you're fortunate enough to have a connection with someone that you really feel deeply, that connection can take on an even more powerful dimension. But also on Friday, the Sun meets the retreating North Node, the point of destiny for us all collectively. But since July 2023, it's really been suggesting to you that how you link to others is going to be a really important strand of how you can make progress as an individual too. So there is a link. Venus moving into your 7th house helps you to bring your natural diplomacy, charm, ability to see two sides of the story, but also to celebrate the things you have in common. Because with Mercury going retrograde, it would be easy, if things do go slightly awry, to immediately jump to the conclusion that someone is being awkward, perhaps playing some games and all that kind of stuff. And Venus just reminds you that a lot of your progress in life comes from your people skills, and to celebrate them. And with the Sun meeting up with the North Node, and also with Chiron towards the end of this week, it doesn't become exact until next Monday. Your relationships in general are really, really critical. And over the next 6 months, lots of exciting developments are possible for you. Now, if you're in a relationship and it doesn't seem to be giving you everything that you would like, perhaps that energy in Mars and Saturn could give you perhaps a tendency to look at your glass as being half empty. Part of it, I feel, will be, if that's the case, because you don't feel heard. And one of the things with Mercury retrograde in the 7th house for us all is to try to work on our listening skills. So if you show an example in that regard and you're having a discussion with someone, but you don't feel they're taking much note of your situation, set your boundary, because the 7th house isn't just about relating, it's also about where we make sure that we're respected. But you can do that with aplomb because of Venus moving into that location. And if you feel really very, very strongly that someone, and it could be an employer, could be a colleague, could be a family member or a friend, has been taking you a little bit for granted, this is a critical time for you to let them know, however diplomatically, and you will choose your words carefully, that that is not acceptable, because that is some of the big lessons that you've learnt over recent years with Pluto in the 4th, Saturn and Neptune in the 6th, that if you give too much, it will get taken for granted, and that is not acceptable. Now, if you'd like to meet someone and you're not in a relationship and that feels frustrating at this time, just know that the combination of Venus and Pluto will see you emanating a very special allure. And one of the things that the Sun connecting to the North Node gives you a platform to do, along with Chiron, over the next 6 months from the solar eclipse, is be more proactive. And, you know, things don't seem to be falling into place. Try to link up with people as a network and interact as much as you can. And that will create lots of opportunities in all sorts of ways for Libra people in general over the next half year. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Libra. Have a great week. If you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share or subscribe. Welcome Scorpio to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm showing the event chart for the week. We need to be mindful of your two rulers of Mars and Pluto. Mars begins this week finding a greater presence in your 5th house, which is wonderful because you have Venus here as well, very close to the part of Fortune and Neptune as this week begins. So your creative output can be very powerful this week, particularly on Wednesday when Venus meets with Neptune. Now the 5th house can also be about dates and socializing and children, but since Saturn moved into this area a year ago, it may not have been such an easy part of your situation. If there has been gains, you probably really had to apply yourself. So Mars definitely brings some uplift, but as it connects with Saturn at the end of this week, it does remind you that however talented we are, it is all about how much application and perspiration we put in. And because Mercury goes retrograde later on Monday in the most practical part of your situation, the smaller details that are often part of what builds up the big picture are just as essential as any big idea you have. So that's a tip for the next 23 days, that you really will need to be mindful of making sure that everything is quite finitely set up. Now, of course, the 6th house can be about obligations, responsibilities, appointments, pets, connections with aunts and uncles and our jobs, nutrition, general physical health and jobs. And all of them are going to come under a massive astral spotlight from Friday at the end of this week as Venus moves into that area. Your personality powers can be important if you are looking to prize open a new financial or business opportunity. Venus also applies to your modern ruler of Pluto for the first time in over 200 years. If you work from home, something good around that can develop over the next few weeks. But also, Venus in the 6th house just suggests that if you are somebody who likes to provide support services to others, that could be another area that you thrive in. But on the same day, the Sun meets the North Node for the first time since 2006 in the sign of Aries. This is the point of destiny for us all collectively, but for you, it is in that very practical 6th house. With the Sun also reaching towards Chiron, which becomes exact on Monday with the solar eclipse, a big opportunity can fall for you over the next half year. But it will be necessary, I feel, to flex. Because you're a fixed sign, having a degree of routine is something you feel comfortable with. But the 6th house does see you needing to lean into what other people expect from you, but not to the degree that you forget your own needs. So if there is something that you want to change about your exercise routine, where you live, your daily structure or routine, who does the domestic chores, some new approaches to diet and nutrition or cooking, all of these things can be really showcased for you over the next half year. But you don't have to pulverize your passion. And that's really the nub of this week's story, Scorpio, because sometimes when we think about all those practical strands, it can seem a little unsexy. But because your ruler Mars and Venus start this week and are collaborating so powerfully this week with other planets, your ability to express your charisma and personality can work with that more practical energy as well. So that's really, really exciting for you. Just one thing, the moon does square up with Neptune at the start of this week. It's a bit of a soggy energy, that. If you are someone who enjoys a little bit of a flutter, it's just saying, just make sure that you don't go for a flutter that's outside what feels comfortable. It's also possible that someone close to you could ask for some kind of financial assistance, but when Neptune's in the mix with the moon, sometimes what we're told or even what we hear may not be what we're told, if that makes sense, because the mutual combination of those two influences can create somewhat of a fudge and a fog, so it's not always easy to think so clearly. So your natural generosity could be very strong this week on the back of that particular aspect, but someone may need a reminding of your boundaries. And the fact that Uranus and Jupiter are getting ever closer together in your 7th house of relating, which will peak in an alliance with Mars on the 21st of April, that's exciting too. So a week of some big shifts around work, health, diet, pets, organisation, routines, but it doesn't mean to say you can't show your flair, your personality power, or your sex appeal. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Scorpio. I hope you have a great week. If you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share, or subscribe. Welcome, Sagittarius, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the ascendant, the sun, or the moon. On the screen now is your event chart. And there in house 1 is the moon in your sign, also forging a delightful link with Mercury in the part of your scope that is to do with the expression of your enthusiasm. How good is that? Now that's at midnight as we go into Monday. Later on in the day, Mercury does go into a retrograde. But let's just also look at the position of Neptune, because since 2012, Neptune has at times given you some divine insights, perhaps some great spiritual growth, added sensitivity to your situation in a very positive way, but at other moments may have seen you feeling a little bit exhausted, run down, and not quite sure in terms of where to live and how to live there and who with. But last week, Mars, the planet of passion, moved into this 4th house, and that gives you quite the bolster. But Neptune does square up with that moon position in your sign. So that energy that has pervaded, particularly over the last year since Saturn moved into Pisces, your 4th house of home, motion, feelings, environment, that can be shifted to some degree by Mars this week, but I still feel that you could be feeling quite sensitive. So who you're spending time with, even if it's, just being in someone's presence, the chances are that you can soak up the energy even if they don't tell you anything. So your atmospheric skills are going to be turned up to max, but also can see you feeling an overload. The good thing about Mars is that if there is anything practical that you want to catch up with in terms of where you live, it gives you more thrust and urgency, because Saturn may have made where you live or the people around you have seemed oppressive at times in the last 12 months. But of course you do have that array of energy in house 5, which is all about shining brightly. It is the sunshine house. Mercury goes retrograde later on in Monday, but in the 5th house, maybe it's just going to give you an opportunity to rethink some of the ways you want to dazzle people with the brilliance of your ideas. This is where you can radiate. Mercury retrogrades, of course, can cause niggles and snares. We all know that, whether it's to do with, industrial action affecting transport links or ticketing or withdrawing money or software failures, home computer glitches, all these things we know are part and parcel of the journey. But the opportunity comes from rethinking, recalibrating and resetting your approach to how you have fun, the 5th house, your thinking around your children, if you have any, how you express your talents. Because believe me, Sagittarius, the next 6 months, you're going to be absolutely on fire. And the whole process starts to really gain traction in a big way towards the end of this week. So please stay with me for more. But at the start of the week, there is a very tender link, not just between the moon and Neptune, but also Venus and the part of fortune. You may have a conversation with someone in your family or someone that you're very close to, which provides a lot of uplift, but particularly if they're very good at listening. and give you the space to say how you feel. But as the week goes on, Venus moves forwards and connects exactly with Neptune. If you are someone who's very, very good at some kind of home or hobby crafting, you have an interest which really helps you to showcase your artistry or flair, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be prescriptive from me or even the planets. It's just that Venus conjunct Neptune can really see you trip the light fantastic. It could be that if you're someone who really enjoys meditation or walking in the countryside or being by water, all of those things can reach into your senses in a very special way. But then as the week goes on, Saturn's joined by Mars. Saturn's been the bad guy for you over the last year, but it's also been making you much more conscious of what you really need around where you live and your emotional situation, and focusing more on those things and excluding the things that you don't need. But Mars applying to Saturn could create a little bit of frustration if something around a practical plan, maybe it's to do with a physical change to your home or having someone in to provide a service, it could be that that can create some dust or some inconvenience, or the person you need to deal with is unreliable, cancellation, Mercury retrograde. But actually what can really affect you most is Mars's conjunction with Saturn, which could make you feel very defensive and quite prickly, to be honest, in the 4th house. But on Friday, Venus glides, sachets into Aries. If you know your astrology, you'll know this is detrimented, but I love to push back on these essential dignities. So Venus for me in Aries is your 5th house. This is about children. This is about play, sociability. It's about where your warmth of personality, your allure are going to be turned up to max through to the 29th. But not just that. For the first time in over 200 years, Venus in Aries applies to Pluto in Aquarius in your 3rd house. Your words, your ideas, your passion, your mode of conveying things is really going to captivate someone. Truly it will. And also on the same day, the Sun applies to the retreating North Node, the point of destiny, the 5th house. And if the 5th house is an area that hasn't been working for you, if you feel that you lack connections to people, you don't have much opportunity to mix and mingle, people seem to be unaware of your talents, you don't get celebrated, you don't seem to get much attention. Just imagine the sun's full radiance pouring itself onto you, because that really is what's possible, because you can get an inner hunch developing with the sun's meeting to the North Node, which can really pull you in a direction which is really right for you at this current time. Also, the sun starts to meet up with Chiron. They become exact on Monday with the solar eclipse, and you will absolutely dazzle over the next half year. Whatever your circumstances are, you will make the most of it to demonstrate to people just what you have to offer. But yes, you are being asked to stay conscious of how things feel, your emotional needs, your family situation, and not to just focus on play and fun, but stay mindful of all the things that Neptune and Saturn have been illustrating to you over, since in the case of Neptune, since 2012, Saturn the last year, because you need those things, because they are important. They're providing the wisdom to guide and protect you, and then in the right situations you can open up with the right people. So what an end to the week. There may be some niggles or frustrations on that practical level at home. Someone may get on your nerves in terms of a family member or someone close, but the big picture is absolutely sensational. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Sagittarius. I hope you have a great week. If you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share or subscribe. Welcome Capricorns, your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart. Let's just look at the position of the moon, because it's tucked up just behind your sun sign in the sign of Sagittarius, which is very much about being free-spirited. But the 12th house is a tender area for the moon, can be one that's more reflective, and it's squaring with Neptune in your 3rd house of everyday communication. It's possible through this week, therefore, that you could, if you have conversations with people, feel things about those conversations which may not necessarily be how the other person wants you to perceive it. So there could be a tendency to be a little bit anxious. Also, Mercury, the planet of communication, later on Monday, despite forging itself a great link to the moon initially, goes into a retrograde in your 4th house of emotion. So over the next 23 days, there may be times that you do want to just withdraw a little bit. That's actually possibly going to be a theme over the next 6 months, to be honest. But it's going to give you an opportunity for enormous growth. But also, you can see quite close to Neptune is Venus. And alongside Venus is the part of fortune. So as much as words or discussions can get a bit mangled, there could also be a conversation which has a huge possibility linked to it. And maybe it's going to be someone that you connect with online. The 3rd house can be to do with digital media. Maybe there's going to be a nice exchange of emails. Maybe someone's going to be flirty with you. But if you recall last week, Mars, the planet of drive and passion, moved into the 3rd house, where Saturn, your ruler, has been bringing a more censorious tone the last year. But Neptune's been there since 2012. So Mars brings some good energy this week, I feel, particularly initially. And if there are things that you feel enthusiastic about, despite the potential for crosswires with Mercury retrograde and confusion with the moon squaring with Neptune, Mars can see you up for the debate. But what about that midpoint? You can see at 19 degrees in the 2nd house, the balance of the moon, that's the empathetic, receptive sides of this event, and the sun, the passion and the drive in Aries. In Aquarius, 2nd house for you, along with Pluto, is about your self-worth. It's also about money. And that midpoint is squaring up with Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, in your 5th house. So if you are someone who enjoys a little bit of a flutter, you can be speculative. It's said that Capricornian people are always very, very cautious. That might be true to a degree, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't equate opportunities once you assess them. But that could make you a bit more impulsive, that link. And because of that square between the moon in a very psychological area and how you think, there could be a connection, particularly with Mercury in retrograde. But you know, if you've got something profound you want to say, something that's heartfelt, sincere, perhaps of a spiritual nature, if you are a healer or a psychic or an artist, a photographer, someone who enjoys film, the middle of this week can be so enriching as Venus reaches an exact conjunction with Neptune. Very moving to your senses. And where Saturn has created some restriction to conversation, connections with neighbours, everyday interactions have felt stilted or cool at times, this can bring some wonderful uplift. And then on Friday, Venus moves out of Pisces and into Aries, technically debilitated, but wonderful if you want to redecorate, buy some new furniture, upcycle some older pieces of furniture in a very imaginative and creative way. If you're someone who enjoys hobby, crafting, all of those things can be blessed right through to the 29th of the month. But Pluto applies to Venus in Aquarius for the first time in 220 years. Huge week. And that's in your 2nd house along with that midpoint. So it's possible that if you work from home and you're creative, some good news is coming. Also on the same day, the 5th, the Sun applies to the retreating North Node, the point of destiny, 4th house. Something linked to your family, a property matter. your historical past, your roots, your instinctive guide can be really enriched. And also the sun starts to edge towards Chiron, which will become exact on Monday with the solar eclipse. And all of that is what I feel is going to propel you into a new dimension over the next half year. It may be that you're going to move home altogether. It may be that you're going to develop a lot more emotional closeness to someone. You may become more emotionally available. You may learn a lot more about how you react to situations. There can be huge growth. There could be a new addition to the family. You may take on a caregiving role to someone older or to someone younger. And if you are someone who can work from home, you can do so extremely effectively with all those energies cresting in your fourth house. But what about your ruler? Well, that's met by Mars as this week draws to a close. And if there has been one conversation going on that hasn't been going so well, and it could be with a sibling, to be honest, it could be a crunch point. And however much Venus and Neptune can urge you to deal with something in the most delicate, sensitive way possible, if you really feel that someone's not respecting the sincerity of your position or not recognizing their attitudes and behavior, perhaps going quite a long way back, and they want to, have a reproachment, they want to get the conversation going again, I feel that you will tell them quite directly what you're not happy with. So if something's been building up, particularly over the last year, a sense of injustice, it may need to get spoken out by the end of this week. Watch that you don't build up a head of frustration. You could end up feeling stressed out, headache, find it hard to sleep if you feel that something's really profoundly unfair or out of balance. But one of the things you could do at the end of this week is try to go somewhere that's very soothing to your senses. Now, it could be a local hostelry that you feel very at ease in, a restaurant, but seriously, it may be a park, or maybe you can have some moments of complete tranquility at home, turning off your mobile phone and just really tuning out, maybe getting out in nature. Those kind of things could be very good for you. But most of all, if you can align with people who really share in a close way, a simpatico with you about how you feel about things, that can be enormously healing at the end of this week and for the next 6 months. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Capricorn. I hope you have a great week. If you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share, or subscribe. Welcome, Aquarius, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart at midnight on Monday. And we can see that Pluto continues right on that first house cusp. That's giving you a big bolster. It's making you more assured in terms of asserting your individuality. But you also have the point between the moon in the friendly and free-spirited Sagittarius and the sun in the passionate Aries. The midpoint between them, which is the balance of this chart, is in your sign at 19 degrees. So you'll need to be very authentically yourself. Often quite a strong Aquarius need is really emphasized this week. And ironically, that midpoint clashes with your modern ruler of Uranus. So it may be by sticking with what you feel comfortable with, or promoting an idea that's unusual, or telling people about the things that you see in the world that are linked to injustices, that could create some tensions with some people close to you who may not want to look at it, who don't have your ability to see the big picture, or you just generally could feel very restless, your nervous system quite wired up. Because the first house is about our body, the fourth house is about our environment. So if your environment is claustrophobic or isn't quite as peaceful as you would like, or you have all the stimulation you need but not the chance to create your own space, all of those things could be a bit of an issue this week. But the moon up in that friendly Sagittarius forges a very good link with Mercury, as this week begins in your third house. So the people you do connect well with, the connection can be strong, despite the fact that Mercury goes retrograde later on Monday. But let's look at Neptune in house 2. That's squaring up with the moon. That's more complex. If there are people you need to deal with who have different values to you, perhaps going back to that family situation, maybe it's to do with someone you share a home with, such as a flatmate, or it is a friend who you're starting to see you're diverging from in terms of your values, which is what the second house is about, or you feel they take your generosity for granted. That can create a drain on you. So just be conscious of that. However, Mars did move into your second house, where Saturn has created quite an impact over the last year and has given you the determination to get your financial situation back on track if all the costs that we've mainly appreciated have impacted on you quite sharply. And that's great that Mars is doing that. But later on in the week, on Wednesday, Venus and Neptune in your second house meet in a gorgeous way. If you are a creative, your imagination can be working overtime in a really inspired way, and it can give you a sense of enrichment in terms of your self-worth, but it's possible that an idea you've got could be monetized in some way, that phrase that is so common these days. But also, as the week goes on, Mars inches forwards and applies to Saturn. So if you have been experiencing frustration or limitation, that can reach a high point as the week draws to a close, and it could see you feeling penned in, maybe exasperated. You know, if you're not quite getting the job you want, if you're dealing with a landlord that's unreasonable, if the cost of your mortgage is really hard to meet, all of these things can be very claustrophobic. But don't underestimate your fighting spirit, Mars, and ability to stick at things, Saturn. The combination of the two can see you continue to gain traction to sort things out. And also on Friday, one of the most dazzling moments of the whole year, because Venus moves forwards into Aries. Venus in Aries has an appetite, a desire to get things done. It's said it's detrimented. It's one of those essential dignities I like to push back on. Venus here can see you really inspire people with your language or your ideas, or you could connect to someone romantically through your thinking, because it links to Pluto in your sign for the first time in 220 years. Do not underestimate what you've got to say, the value of your ideas, particularly if they are more individual. And then also on Friday, the Sun meets with the North Node, the point of destiny in your third house. Since the North Node, the true North Node, moved into your third house on the 13th of July 2023, your desire to have your voice heard has probably increased. Has it been heard as much as you would like? You've got a fantastic opportunity in the next 6 months to really get to where you want to be. And that's because the Sun also moves forwards and starts to connect to Chiron. So if you have felt unheard, or there's been siblings that were dismissive of you, or neighbours who were rude and uncaring, or you work in an environment where a boss isn't particularly open to some of your brilliant ideas, the life force that you're going to develop towards the end of this week and into the first day of next week with the total solar eclipse applying to Chiron, is going to be so formidable. So whatever restrictions, limitations and frustrations have presented themselves over the last year, believe me, you're going to bounce back and absolutely dazzle people with the strength of your conviction, your skillful articulation, your wit, your charm. There's going to be a pickup in your social interaction. Expect text messages and emails to be pinging in. Everybody's going to want to talk to you. It's going to be really exciting. But what Saturn has taught you over the last year, and this is really critical, is your self worth. And with Mars bolstering Saturn at the end of this week, even if it's been painful that other people haven't always got it, you've got it. It's taught you to value money very carefully. Neptune going through Pisces since 2012 may have made you a tad too generous, too compassionate, too giving at times. Saturn's asked you to dig in, be more robust, chip away at things, embrace thrift, make food from scratch, be more inventive with resources. It in itself has been a good thing, even if a difficult thing. So as you go forth with all your ideas, and could be very positive in terms of your love life if you're single and you'd like to meet someone, or in terms of your work, the main thing is to remember what Saturn's taught you about your value. Do not bend on that, because Neptune at the start of this week in that square with the moon could confuse you a little bit. You could be tempted into supporting the situation, which is not good for you. And Mercury going retrograde on Monday suggests that something may need to be rethought. Despite all this third house energy building up, you may have to flex a little bit, go again, reposition, ditch one thing, go with another, adapt something. But it can be fluid, but the overwhelming thrust for you is that over the next half year, you are going to be such a compelling voice and person for people to experience. Have a great week. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to like, comment, share or subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Come Pisces, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 1st of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart for the week. Now, your two ruling planets are right at the heart of the action. Jupiter is getting closer to Uranus. You can see that in house 3. How you express yourself, your thinking can be very imaginative, fresh, and that's going to build up to a peak on the 21st. But you also have Mars that joined your sign last week and has given you a greater presence, more assertiveness, and hopefully a physical lift, because Saturn over the last year you may have found has been limiting. However, Neptune, your other ruler in your own sign, is compromised by the moon at the start of this week. A professional situation or worldly interaction, that could be a bit draining. But you can see that the parts of Fortune and Venus are very close together in your sign. That's a great asset, particularly if you want to give yourself some kind of makeover. So that's lovely. However, the big action, the Sun of course, is in house 2, which is all about the foundations of your world. And Mercury in house 2 is going to go into a retrograde later on Monday. So something that's important around a financial matter, you do need to be very precise this week, because the link between the moon and Neptune could see you feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit under energized despite Mars's presence, and just at a time when you really need to be very precise about the individual details and the minutiae of something to do with a contract, a document, an email, a text message you get. So really concentrate on those things. But the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, so that's the balance of the chart, if you like, the yin yang, is 19 degrees in Aquarius, which is your 12th house, and that's in a tangle with Uranus. So your nervous system could be a little bit wired up, particularly if you're feeling anxious for some reason and finding it hard to understand what that might be about. You may even feel that you've got an excess of nervous energy and a lack of physical energy. Mars is going to help that generally, for sure, over the next 5 weeks or so, but by the end of this week it does forge an alliance with Saturn, which is really asking you to rinse out of your world anything which is not really good for you. And that requires you to perhaps be very self-honest about some things you eat or drink, and really get things honed down to what's absolutely essential. But there is one magical link this week for you, Pisces. and that's on Wednesday when Venus meets with Neptune. If you do have a date with someone, you could find that there's something about you that they find really fascinating, but they may find it a little bit difficult to decipher what it is. Now, I don't mean that unkindly at all. They may just feel that there's something otherworldly about you that's mesmerizing. So someone could really be impressed by you at the heart of the week. They may not even tell you. It could be someone just has a chat with you and just thinks, wow, that person has got something about them that's really special. And that's important because Venus moves on Friday into your sector of money, everyday money, but also self-worth. So if you do feel at times this week a bit drained because of Neptune's square with the moon, the midpoint square with Uranus, that can be a real bolster to you if someone pays you a compliment, but your finances can improve on Friday onwards. And it could be past efforts, savings, pensions, investments, hard work behind the scenes that really pays off as Pluto applies to Venus for the first time across these two signs together for 220 years. Pluto is going to arouse your psychological world hugely over the next years. This link with Venus suggests that your ability to drill down into situations, whether it is to do with who you like and who you're drawn to, or about business and money in a very perceptive way. But also, the Sun meets with the point of destiny on Friday. A stunningly important event. This hasn't happened since 2006 in the sign of Aries. And again, this can be good news for your finances or the foundations of your world, which can be transformed over the next 6 months as the Sun advances on and meets with Chiron. That becomes exact with the solar eclipse on Monday. But it is true that that application of Mars to Saturn could see you feeling a bit penned in, but honestly, that's a fleeting influence. These influences coming in through the Sun's application to the North Node, Venus in Aries. Don't worry about the technical debilitation. This is good for you. And also the fact that the position of Chiron in the second house for you is very much about how much you value yourself. If you do doubt that, I feel that what Mars is saying to Saturn is stop putting yourself down. Look at the things you do and the things you do well. Celebrate the things that you're effective at. Celebrate the things that you're thrifty about. Celebrate your appreciation of some very natural things like good food, good wine. Celebrate if you're a gardener. Celebrate if you're a home baker or a cook. Celebrate what makes you often there for other people when they go through crises and can be very compassionate for them. So it's important that you celebrate your value as this week draws to a close, but as you do, your physical finances can be transformed over the next weeks through to the 29th of the month. Now, of course, Mercury does go into a retrograde in that second house area. So, like I said at the outset, very important to be mindful of the details around transactions, but the big picture gives you an awesome opportunity to get on the front foot in terms of what you earn, how you feel about yourself, and those core foundations really make them more stable and strong over the next half year. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Pisces. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. If you've yet to like, comment, share or subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did so now.